This is PBS.
WETA makes more than great TV. We give teachers support materials for their classrooms. We train childcare providers to use TV as a learning tool. We help kids explore their creative energy. WETA Educational Outreach. You may not see what we do every day, but you probably see the results.
They feel, perhaps as we do. They pay tribute to the moon. Do we share more with these great creatures than we realized? Find out in Reflections on Elephants, a new National Geographic special.
Tune in Tuesday night at 8 on WETA.
Next time on POV, the American dream.
Just perfect, you know, like a dream house.
But at what cost?
I don't know anyone who wants to stay here for the rest of their life.
Home Economics, a documentary of suburbia.
Join us right here on WETA.
Next time on Nova, a stonemason and an archaeologist travel to Egypt to find out for themselves how the Great Pyramids were built. With an Egyptian crew and ancient methods, they work to solve one of the world's oldest mysteries by reconstructing this old pyramid. Next time on Nova.
Wednesday night at 9 on WETA. WETA presents Bernardo Bertolucci's epic vision of the life of China's last emperor, Saturday night at 9.
This is a nightly business report news brief made possible by GT Global, serving individual and institutional investors worldwide for 25 years. When you invest for your future, think global.
I'm Paul Kangas. In a combination that will create an $11 billion personal and household products company, Kimberly-Clark will acquire Scott Paper and a stock swap, which should be completed late this year. News of this mega merger and a resurgence in technology stocks spawned a solid rally on Wall Street today as the Dow Industrial Average rose 27.5 points to its 46th record high this year. The NASDAQ index advanced 6.5 points to close above the 1,000 level for the first time ever, and the American Exchange Index also set a record with a 2.75 point gain. And Philip Morris refused comment on reports it wants to sell its huge baking division for about $1 billion. For more financial news, tune into the Nightly Business Report weekdays on this public television station.
Major funding for Charlie Rose is provided by the people at DuPont, originators of products and ideas that make a difference in everyday life. DuPont, better things for better living. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the annual financial support of viewers like you. Charlie Rose is also made possible by these funders.
Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight, a look ahead at the Whitewater hearings, which begin on Tuesday.
No single allegation seemed more troubling or suspicious than to somehow link Foster's death to Whitewater.
And a portrait of Newt Gingrich from his biographer.
The good Newt is an idea minute, brain on fast forward, laptops for the poor, all that. The bad Newt is the Newt who says the planet is a dark and bloody place without America. The bad Newt is the guy who says, I'm A and you're B, and I'll show you. You know, it's confrontational. People who run for president in this country bring people together. Newt Gingrich's whole career is setting up opposites.
And columnist Ellis Coates on men.
The roles have changed, but they haven't changed totally, and it's not quite clear to what extent they are changing. So we have a lot of what I call the paradoxes of partial equality, where on one hand we declare as a society that men and women are equal, and yet we don't treat men and women at all alike in any respect.
Whitewater, Gingrich, and men when we continue. The Whitewater hearings before the Senate Banking Committee begin tomorrow. We'll take a look at what's in store with two top Washington journalists, Mike Lissakoff from Newsweek magazine and Jay Carney of Time magazine. I'm pleased to have them join us this evening from our Washington station. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Jay, what do we expect tomorrow?
Well, we'll expect the launching of these hearings that Senator Al D'Amato from New York is chairing. He'll bring some of the headline witnesses. He'll open with Webb Hubbell, the former Deputy Attorney General and friend of the Clintons, whose role was peripheral in the events that the hearings are about, which is the days after Vince Foster's death. He is a useful person for D'Amato to have because he's about to go to prison for 21 months for overbilling clients at the Rose Law Firm, where he worked with Hillary Rodham Clinton, and he was indicted in the Whitewater investigation, the independent counsel, and is now going to prison not too long from now.
Yeah, but I understand he evidently did not get a recommendation for a reduced sentence from Ken Starr, the prosecutor, because apparently he didn't provide much information that was of a help to them.
Exactly. When he was originally indicted, there was certainly a lot of speculation that he would cooperate, that he would be able to get a reduced sentence, but the independent counsel did not file any letter recommending reduction.
What else? What do you say about this, Michael? Is it...
Well, I think it's kind of ingenious political theater on D'Amato's part to pick Hubbell to start off the hearings because even though he is, as Jay said, peripheral to the events, he's such a great political punching bag. Here is the good buddy of President Clinton, the former law partner of Hillary's, who is a self-confessed felon about to go to prison. I mean, he is the one clearly unsympathetic character that they can bring forth. Remember, these hearings are going to be a very difficult thing for D'Amato and the Republicans to pull off if they want to use this to score points against the Clintons. I mean, you have all these friends of Vince Foster. The hearings are about the handling of the documents in Vince Foster's office after his death.
Well, let me interrupt you there. Why are the hearings about that?
Well...
Other than because that's what the chairman wants to talk about.
Well, because when Whitewater started to take off as an issue in December of '93, the allegation was made that Whitewater documents were spirited out of Foster's office in the hours after his death by top aides, by top White House aides. Now, the facts are, as we know them at the moment, somewhat more complicated than that, and it is not clear that anybody was really thinking about Whitewater at all in the hours after Foster's death. But that allegation, in and of itself, raised a whole level of suspicion about Whitewater that has continued to this day, and probably led directly to the appointment of the independent counsel, which has given Whitewater a life of its own. I mean, the mere fact that we have an independent counsel investigation and dozens of FBI agents scouring Arkansas is one thing that has kept it alive. And it is probably, I mean, no single allegation seemed more troubling or suspicious than to somehow link Foster's death to Whitewater. You know, is there any possibility that he was so worried about Whitewater that he killed himself because he was so fearful of some damaging disclosure? Or is it even worse than that? Some people believe Foster was murdered, even though there's really no evidence of that. But it is that level of suspicion that the handling of the documents in Foster's office created that that has made it one of the core issues in what is broadly called Whitewater.
Jay, what has the White House done in terms of providing documents? And the documents that they have provided what insight so far into what we know about the aftermath of Vince Foster's suicide?
Well, it's interesting because what the White House has done is changed a strategy towards Whitewater and dealing with the press that had been embedded since the beginning of the administration and really since the campaign, which was one of extreme secrecy and reluctance to release information, and such tightly held information about Whitewater during the campaign in the early part of the administration that even some of the Clintons' top aides didn't know what Whitewater was all about, which was part of the problem, which was part of how the way the press aides and some of the senior political people dealt with discussing Whitewater with the press was part of what helped fuel the controversy. I mean, the way that some of the press people dealt with the handling of Foster's documents, misstatements they made, had a lot to do with simply not knowing what Whitewater was about, not knowing that Foster was working on Whitewater, and that sort of thing. Now you've got a new kind of charm offensive going on where within the last 2 weeks, the White House has preemptively released, if not released, shown reporters many of the documents that were in Foster's office that were moved as part of the personal files that were moved in the way that troubled the Republicans so much, and including the famous Whitewater file, which has been essentially under lock and key for the past 2 years. What it's shown is that there really wasn't much there, that Foster was working primarily on closing out the Clintons' investment in Whitewater, handling the sale of the Whitewater investment back to Jim McDougal, their partner, and dealing with it on the Clintons' 1992 taxes. There are some interesting things about it. One thing that came out later in the week last week is that Vince Foster was a bit troubled by how to handle the sale of Whitewater on the Clintons' taxes because he was afraid to say that they took a loss on Whitewater in their taxes, which is what the Clintons had maintained for so long, because they didn't have the documentation to prove that the Clintons sustained such a dramatic loss. And that would raise so many issues about the Clintons' truthfulness in their representations about Whitewater that instead he reported it as a $1,000 capital gain, which is what they received for their sale of Whitewater in the end in 1992. But it was a very clever strategy by the White House. Even though they tripped up a little bit last week, they've essentially given reporters everything in advance of D'Amato's hearings that D'Amato could have brought up in the coming weeks. I mean, they sort of stolen his thunder, which I mean, we'll see if D'Amato has anything, but there's no indication that he has anything that the White House hasn't revealed in advance.
Michael, is there any evidence that the White House mishandled the aftermath of Vince Foster's suicide in terms of access to his office, in terms of impeding an investigation either by the Park Police or by the FBI or anyone else?
Yeah, there's abundant evidence of that, that they mishandled the matter. I mean, there's no question that the Park Police, which was assigned the job of investigating the Foster's death, was hindered at every step of the way by the White House and primarily White House counsel Bernard Nussbaum. He barred the Park Police officers from entering Foster's office the day after his death.
And his rationale for doing that was,
well,
as I understand, the explanation at least, was that because there may be privileged information there or national security information on his desk.
Sure, executive privilege, which is a claim we have heard many times before, and is not a claim without legal substance. I mean, technically, Nussbaum was taking a very narrow and, from his point of view, probably correct legal position that nothing in Foster's office could be inspected by anybody, by any law enforcement agency, until he had the opportunity to review it and make sure that it did not infringe upon attorney-client or executive privilege claims. The problem is the way Nussbaum handled it in a very arbitrary and, shall we say, not exactly the most deft of political touches. He angered the Park Police. He angered the Justice Department. He created a public relations fiasco. He missed the one piece of evidence that was in the office that we know about, the torn-up note in the bottom of Foster's briefcase. He inspected Foster's briefcase 2 days later when there was a bit of a ruckus about how the documents were going to be searched. Nussbaum and the Justice Department work out this deal where he will search the documents in the presence of Park Police and FBI agents and Justice Department officials. They're all arranged around the room. Nussbaum goes through it, doesn't really show anybody anything, shuffles through the documents very quickly. At one point, a FBI agent stands up from his seat, and a deputy White House counsel says, "I hope you're not trying to get a peek at these documents." All precisely designed to infuriate the investigators, the law enforcement people are there. And then the one piece of evidence that's in there, which is this torn-up note in the bottom of the briefcase, he misses. Nussbaum looks in the briefcase, says it's empty, and then that's it. And then 4 days later, another of Nussbaum's deputies looks in the briefcase and says, "Oh my God, look, what about this?" And they put the scraps together, and it turns out to be the closest thing resembling a suicide note we have in Foster's death. It expressed his anguish over events in Washington, primarily surrounding the White House Travel Office affair, which was a sort of a mini scandal that was going on in May and June of and early part of July of 1993. Which is probably forgotten by most of the public today, but it's the one thing that we know Foster was obsessed and consumed with. In fact, one of the things we learned from this new White House openness policy is that Foster was keeping a very detailed handwritten notebook specifying day by day, minute by minute, everything he did in connection with the Travel Office affair. Is something that really shows the level of obsession he had about this ultimately or somewhat second-rate and minor league affair.
Let me go to the question of Maggie Williams, who is Chief of Staff for the First Lady. The story is that she, in the testimony of one Secret Service agent at the White House, took some documents out. She has denied that, and I understand that she has passed 2 lie detector tests suggesting that she is, in fact, telling the truth. What's the story there?
Well, exactly. This was D'Amato's trump card in a way. I mean, I think that having this Secret Service agent, law enforcement agent, testify that he saw the First Lady's Chief of Staff leave the counsel's office, which included Vince Foster's office, the night of Vince Foster's death, carrying documents. I mean, that is, as Michael was saying earlier, the summation of the conspiracy theory that within hours after his death, they were spiriting away documents. And the White House had always maintained that no documents were removed until 2 days later when Nussbaum did the separation of files in front of federal law enforcement agents, and that's when the Whitewater files were put in a box with other personal files. This Secret Service agent, Henry O'Neill, says that he saw Maggie Williams carrying those documents out that night. Now, this was clearly going to be a case, and will be a case when these individuals testify, of a he said, she said. Maggie Williams will have her arguments strongly buttressed by the fact that she voluntarily, in fact, I think at her suggestion, took polygraph tests to prove that she was telling the truth. Certainly that's not going to help O'Neill's testimony at all. But what you can count on D'Amato doing is, since he has no smoking gun that we can tell, he'll try and paint a picture of a lot of obfuscation, a lot of contradictory testimony that suggests that someone's not telling the truth. One thing I heard is that the 3 people who went into Foster's office that night, Nussbaum, Maggie Williams, and Patsy Thomason, another White House aide, cannot be exact. All of their testimony contradicts itself in small ways in terms of who came in with whom at what time and who left at what time. None of it amounts to anything in terms of specifically that testimony, but D'Amato will try and portray it as a lack of candor, and that will be one of the high points of the hearings.
Have either of you heard that the committee has something that will trip up the White House that the White House, doesn't know about?
I'm not aware of anything. I would not be surprised, though, if D'Amato, having gone to these lengths to set up these hearings and knowing he's going to be in the spotlight, doesn't have something. It's hard for me to imagine it's a smoking gun or something truly dramatic, but I have to believe that there's going to be at least a couple of surprises in these hearings.
But no leaks as to what they might be?
Well, I mean, a lot has leaked out so far, and we've learned a lot in just the last week and a half. Maybe Jay.
Well, I don't. One thing I think it seems to be the case, and you could tell last week where the Republicans were going. Once they were infuriated, infuriated by the fact that the White House had done this document dump and released all these documents, and pointed out to reporters where the controversial testimony was going to be, who was contradicting Maggie Williams and Bernie Nussbaum and all that sort of thing. And they began to send out signals about what else they had, and that's where Republicans on the Hill started talking about there's more to Whitewater, there's more to Whitewater, and that's when the White House then released these additional documents about the Clintons' 1992 taxes that contained Foster's notes to himself in which he worried about how to handle Whitewater on their tax returns.
Jay, let me quote from your piece in Time magazine that's on the newsstands this morning.
Okay.
Quote, a White House top administration official told Time last week, "It's not Whitewater they're worried about, it's Hillary's finances. They're worried about the $100,000 she made."
Right. Well, what that's a reference to is that one of the things, actually, in the initial disclosure of the Whitewater file that was in Foster's office, it contained evidence or information and reference to the fact that Jim Blair, an old friend of the Clintons from Arkansas, a lawyer for the Tyson food industry, was helping them in the sale of Whitewater. Foster, one of the points the White House
so far, for the benefit of the audience, so far the stories about him have been essentially that he was involved in giving some advice to her, which helped her make the money in the commodities trading.
Right. Well, this is the thing. Back when Vince Foster killed himself, nobody knew about the commodities trading. So one aspect of speculation right now is that one of the things that the White House wanted to keep under wraps was Jim Blair, essentially. They didn't want, if reporters got a hold of this file and they found out about Jim Blair in Whitewater, that might lead them to the commodities trading. And the commodities, and this is speculation, but there is no doubt that when the commodities story broke last year, the First Lady and her aides and a lot of the people around the Clintons were very upset about it. It was something they clearly didn't want the public to know about. It raised all sorts of questions about was she getting favorable treatment, perhaps from Jim Blair, from the broker, and then especially on when she was having margin calls on her investments, that she simply didn't have the required collateral to back up those investments.
Is Whitewater more about her than anything else?
I think you might see Al D'Amato try to portray it that way. I think, if you look at the witness list, there's some evidence that they're going to try and link her to it in a variety of ways.
In the end, based on the reporting you have done, do you think there's much here?
I think that I'll make it brief because I think Michael wants to say something also, but I think that what is there has been out there. This has damaged the Clintons already. It's been 2 years. In many ways, it helped take apart the Clinton administration in its second year. You can link it to the demise of health care reform, to the '94 elections. I mean, the damage, I think, for the most part, has been done. And what we're going to find out in the next 2 weeks is a lot about what we already know, and that is that this was a White House that was obsessed with secretiveness about Whitewater.
But is it more of the way the White House has handled, letting the information out and trying to sort of hold back information than it is about anything that actually went on in Arkansas?
I think so.
I think you can make a credible argument that this is a scandal that was, if not wholly created, largely created by the inept White House handling of questions about the matter. I mean, the basic facts of Whitewater were all out there in March of '92 when Jeff Gerth of the New York Times wrote his famous story breaking the Whitewater, breaking the whole Whitewater story. And the fact is the Clintons scrambled and prevaricated, or the campaign did, about their investment in that company. They provided misleading documents, they provided misleading explanations, and they got through the campaign, and they got through the New Hampshire primary, which is when Gerth's story first came up, and the press went on to other things, but the thing came back to haunt them, and when it came back to haunt them in the White House, once again, they provided misleading explanations, they withheld documents, they misled reporters, and this whole question just gathered more and more momentum. That it led to the appointment of an independent counsel that's costing something like $11 million so far.
Let me close with this then, Michael. How much cooperation between the Senate Banking Committee and Ken Starr, the independent counsel?
I think there's some, but I don't know that it's necessarily as suspicious as some people in the White House are trying to present it. Starr has sort of given the green light for D'Amato to go ahead, which is one indication that he's not going to indict anybody on any of these Washington matters that are going to be dealt with in the hearings, and that D'Amato is. But on the same token, he's sitting back and waiting. Everybody's going to be testifying under oath. If something comes up, if there is some new contradiction, or D'Amato's people come up with something that Starr didn't know about, Starr's there, he can come back and he can reopen this phase of the investigation.
Michael Isikoff from Newsweek magazine, Jay Carney from Time. Thank you both. Whitewater hearings, the Senate Banking Committee, begin tomorrow. We'll be right back. Dick Williams is here. He's written a book called Newt. He has known Newt Gingrich for some 18 years, and he went to Georgetown with Bill Clinton. Back in a moment. Dick Williams, stay with us. Since the 1994 election, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich has taken this country by storm. From polemic academic to masterful politician, he has defeated the odds with his vision and tactics for America and the Republican Party. Atlanta Journal columnist Dick Williams has known the Speaker for 18 years. In Newt, leader of the Second American Revolution, Williams traces the man and his ideas and his critics, and he's here to tell us what he has found out about what some call the second most powerful man in America, Newt Gingrich. Welcome to the broadcast, old friend.
Glad to be here, Charlie.
Great to have you here.
Glad to see you've made the big time, and I'm proud of you.
I should say right off the top that the Ethics Committee investigation into Gingrich is underway.
It is underway. In fact, Tuesday in Washington, Newt Gingrich's agent, Lynn Chu, will testify beginning the part of the Ethics Committee investigation into the deal of his book with HarperCollins.
Now, is that the only thing they're investigating, or are they going into GOPAC and a lot of other things that have been alleged by Bonner and other Democrats?
They will, but first up is the question over the book, provoked by the fact that, as you know, Speaker Gingrich goes on a nationwide tour in August. He's already backed away from having his publisher pay for it. He's going to pay for it. And I think that's the first agenda item behind closed doors in the Ethics Committee.
All right. And he will testify, and Rupert Murdoch will testify, and Newt's agent will testify, and whoever else.
And Murdoch's lobbyists in Washington will testify as well.
As to the nature of the deal between them.
Yes, and what they said in their various meetings and so forth.
Okay. Let me move on to this. I mean, you first met him, what, 18 years ago?
18 years.
He was running for, well, 18 years ago, he was running for Congress?
He was running unsuccessfully for Congress. You know, a lot of people don't realize he ran in a heavily Democratic district, and he didn't make it to his third try.
Yeah.
And I got to know him.
What was different about 78 that was not true in 76 and 74?
Well, in 74, he had a little item called Watergate.
Right.
And he got swept away in that and lost by 2 percentage points. Then in 76, there he was running, and a fellow named Jimmy Carter was coming out of Georgia, and the state of Georgia was energized, and Newt got swamped by President Carter's victory. Right. So he'd lost twice by a couple of percentage points, and then finally in 1978, the man he'd been running against stepped down. It was an open seat at that point, and Gingrich became Congressman Gingrich in 1979.
What's interesting about the book is that you make the point repeatedly that he has not, in terms of his ideas, changed much. Much has been made by his critics about the fact that he was a Rockefeller Republican, he was a moderate Republican, and all of a sudden now he's the leader of, quote, the conservative revolution. But you say that he has been preaching the same message, simply refining it at the edges.
Absolutely. Look, the Rockefeller Republican thing was understandable. On one issue, Newt Gingrich has always differed from most of his Southern peers of that time, and that's on race. He's always been very inclusive, an integrationist. He favored Rockefeller simply on the issue of race in the 1968 campaign. But you know, Charlie, I found, as I was researching this book, I pulled some of my files from the Atlanta newspapers, and I found in my drawer a speech that Newt Gingrich gave on the floor of Congress in 1983, and there he listed 9 of the 10 points in the contract with America. Now, his critics will tell you that the contract with America is the product of focus groups and polling data. Yes, some of the language in it is, but 9 of those 10 issues Gingrich was pushing to his congressional colleagues back in 1983. In fact, he argues with me that he was doing it in 1980, but I can't prove that, so I'll go with 83.
Tell me what you think he wants to do. I mean, what is it that is the driving force behind his own ambition?
Oh, I think it's real clear. He firmly believes that America is following the wrong course, and he wants to change it. You don't hear many politicians use active verbs like wanting to destroy the welfare state. Newt Gingrich uses that verb. He
By
really,
welfare state, he means what?
He means what he perceives as
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security,
all the rest of it. A government that exists on transfer payments is not going to be a very efficient government. And Newt Gingrich wants to return us. Some people call him a revolutionary. For point of argument in my book, I call him a counter-revolutionary. He wants to return the nation to what it was before, say, 1965.
But the interesting thing about that, and he was here talking about that, and I tried to find out from him how he characterized himself. He points to 1965, Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society. But a lot of the kinds of things that the social welfare state, the welfare state in America, really began with the New Deal, did it not?
But Gingrich doesn't question a lot of that, and that drives his conservative Republican allies nuts because he's more apt to praise Franklin Delano Roosevelt than he is Ronald Reagan. But, you know, let me try some shorthand with you. We shouldn't do shorthand, but let's do it. I'm trying to define this welfare state that he opposes. Let me give you one statistic. The average age of grandmothers in Atlanta public housing projects is 32.
Grandmothers.
Grandmothers, the average age. Now that says to any rational person that we've got a problem with dependency, that we have generational dependency on the government, and that the welfare system in all of its manifestations, Medicaid, Medicare, just isn't working.
So his belief is that if you want to look to the reasons for the breakdown in the family structure in America, it is social welfare programs.
Absolutely. And you know, the old thing about you reward what you want to encourage and you penalize what you want to discourage. Unfortunately, in the welfare system, over its many years, we have rewarded behavior that we want to discourage, such as illegitimate births and so forth, and all the pathologies that all of us discuss too often.
But the interesting thing about your book, too, and it is a favorable review of him, it is the notion that he may be wrong about the inner city.
He could be.
You know, that where he is vulnerable about his philosophy is the inner city, and that perhaps that's where his conservative opportunity society ideas can't function right now.
But, you know, I would like to liken this to Nixon going to China. The Democrats have taken on inner city problems, primarily, for the last 40 years. I think it's